Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir, daf Chet. Today's daf is sponsored by Joyce Ben David in honor of Rabbanit Michelle. Thank you for the clarity of your teaching as you motivate us to continue learning the daily daf. Thank you. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick review from yesterday. So we started with the Mishna, okay, back on Tet Vav Amud Aleph, that someone says I'm going to be a Nazir when I have a child, and I'm a Nazir for 100 days. And then we said, it all depends. When the child was born, if it was born until the 70th day, then let's just go with Tosefta for right now. Then you can overlap, right? You can basically do both naziruyot at the same time and end up with only 100 days altogether. That was lo hifsid klum, you don't lose anything. To which Rav said, Yom shiv'im oleh lekanu lekanu. That was where we really spent most of the majority of our daf, was trying to figure out this shita of Rav. Rav says the 70th day counts, again, day 70, your child is born sometime during the day. The beginning of the day counted as day 70. Then you start your new nazirut for your son, which gets absorbed into the nazirut of this 100 days. And on account of that, since we already said we're splitting the day somewhat, he views day 70 also as day 71 in the count of the 100. So you end up counting that day as twice. And we basically explained that it must be on the principle of miktzad yom kikula. What we basically did was we brought two questions from the Mishna against Rav. Then, from some of the details mentioned in the Mishnah, the first one we resolved, the second one we couldn't. So we then said it must be Rav doesn't go with the Mishnah. And then instead of suggesting maybe Rav has the rights to go against the Tanaim, because he's a Tana who he has status like a Tana, instead, the Gemara said, no, we're going to find a Tana that he holds on. We tried Abba Shaul about Avelut because Rabbi Shaul had the approach that day 7 can count both for Shiva and for Shloshim, which is the same idea, right? The beginning of the day starts as one count and the second part of the day becomes another count. But we said, no, distinction for the Rabbanan Deoraita. Maybe that's just Avelut, which is rabbinic, and this is Avelut, which is this is Nazirut, which is by Torah law, and you can't say what's true for rabbinic law would be true for Torah law. We could see that maybe you could count something as 2 days for rabbinic law, but we're definitely not going to do it for Torah law. Then we brought Rabbi Yossi, and that's where things got a little bit complicated, but I'll try to simplify it for you. Rabbi Yossi was talking about a woman who's a zava, who bleeds on one day, waits the next day to see if she's Torah. Zavot always go to the mikveh in the morning, so she goes to the mikveh in the morning, but then she still waits out the day to make sure she doesn't have bleeding. Then it happened to be, it was on Yud Daled Nisan, it was the day they bring the Korban Pesach. They included her in the Korban Pesach thinking she was pure. Then she gets impure, she sees blood. So now, Rabbi Yossi basically said, oh, look, her Korban Pesach counts, even though retroactively, theoretically, she should have been impure, but we don't view it that way. Why not? Miktzad yom kikulo. Part of the day she was pure, part of the day she was impure. Here we have a good proof where we could count one day as both. However, there was a bit of a problem because he also said in a different source that any objects that she touched before that could become impure are retroactively impure because we view it as if it was this continuum from the day before when she saw blood and today when she saw blood, and therefore everything's impure. So we had two ways to read that. One was to say that's just a rabbinic ordinance. The rabbis were strict, but by Torah law, she's really not impure retroactively, which would then fit perfectly with the Rav. Rav could still say he fits with Rabbi Yossi because we again view this day, at least on the Torah level, as two different days. She's pure in the morning, she's impure in the afternoon, and that's why her Korban Pesach worked. We have one explanation, though, that maybe he really meant on a Torah level, and then really, she's impure retroactively. The only thing you have to explain is why the Korban Pesach worked for her then. And the reason the Korban Pesach worked, they gave some explanation. This is what we call Trumat Tahom. It was an unknown impurity. She didn't know she was impure. Korban Pesach works when you don't know you're impure. And that's a side reason. It has to do with Korban Pesach. But in the end, that means by Torah law, the impurity goes retroactively, which basically doesn't help us at all for Rav. Because in the end, that day is a full day of impurity. There's just some unique halacha by Korban Pesach, which is different. So now we go back to starting from 6 lines from the bottom of yesterday's daf. We now want to show, so we want to go back and kind of strengthen this idea that Rav could hold like Rabbi Yossi. And therefore we want to strengthen the idea that this tuma that he talked about, that going back retroactively from the morning or the night before she was already impure, that's going to be only rabbinic. which is then going to say, really though, on a Torah level, he thinks these 2 days are separate. And you could say Mitzad Yom Kikulo, and only Mikanu Lahaba, only from here on in, is she going to be impure. So I'm going to prove it from Rabbi Yoshia. After Rabbi Yoshia Savar Lemafreya Midirabanan. So 6 lines from the bottom of Tefap Amubet. How do we know this? Detanya, it's actually not Detanya. Detanya is a mistake here. It should be De'amal, because this isn't a Braita. This is Rabbi Yoshaya, who's arguing with Rabbi Yochanan, and they're both Emoraim. Tanya is a word that denotes a Braita. So some of the commentaries take this word out and say it should be De'amal. Rabbi Yoshaya Amar, Aval haro'eh zav b'shvi'i shelo, soter et shelefanav. A zav, which is like a zava, okay? But this case, he already had to count 7 clean days because he saw already twice. And on the 7th day, he has an impure discharge. So soter et shelefanav, he goes back and has to start all the way from the beginning, just like a woman who's a nida, who nowadays, nida is really, again, without getting into all the details, we treat it as if maybe you're a zava, which requires 7 clean days. Nida doesn't need 7 clean days. Zava does. We do the 7 clean days with one minor difference, which is we go to the mikveh at night. Usually a zava gedola would go to the mikveh in the morning. We go to the mikveh at night because nidas go to the mikveh at night. It's got kind of laws of both. Anyway, without getting into all those details, we have time till we get to nida and we'll learn all of that inside. But somebody sees on the 7th day, so teva to the fanaf. Rabbi Yochanan says, and I'm going to skip the back and forth about Rabbi Yochanan. In the end, the way they understand Rabbi Yochanan is lo nistor velo yomo. It doesn't even cancel that day. To which they now say, Rabbi Yossi, so Rabbi Yoshaya says to Rabbi Yochanan, you don't think it cancels anything. Why not? And remember, the zava on the 7th day, just like I said, a zava gedola would, is, right, a zava gedola is someone who sees bleeding for 3 days, not in the time of her period. Now, we're going to get to her in a minute. But he says, you think that 7th day isn't canceled. Why? Because what did he do on the 7th day? He went to the mikveh in the morning. So he says, Rabbi Yossi, kai kavatech. He says, Rabbi Yossi holds like you, which really means you hold like Rabbi Yossi. Damal mikanu lahaba mitameh. You must hold like Rabbi Yossi, who holds the tumah only comes in after, meaning day 7 came in fine, you were pure, you went to the mikveh, everything's good. That finishes your 7 clean days. Oh, you're going to see something later that day? That's judged independently. That's not part of your 7 clean days. Okay, you'd have to go to the mikveh anyway, because it was an impure discharge, but you go to the mikveh and you could theoretically already go that day, and when the sun sets, you'll be pure. So the Gemara asks, but wait a minute, but we had that source where Rabbi Yossi said, the tumah goes retroactively. So how could Rabbi Yoshaya say the tumah is only from here on in? Must be It must be Rabbi Yoshaya understood that, again, on a deoraita level, on a Torah level, letter of the law, that day could count as both. And therefore, when it comes to canceling the 7 clean days, we're not going to have it cancel the 7 clean days. We might say that any tumah you touch that day is going to be impure retroactively, to be strict like the rabbis, but that's all astringency. That's not really the law. So there we have another proof. There's only one more thing left. And this goes back to the zava gedola. What is a zava gedola? Again, a zava is someone who has blood, not in the time of her expected period or beyond the time her expected period is supposed to go. She sees blood one day. So she's called a zava ketana. She's called a shomeret yom keneged yom. She now has to wait one day to see what happens. She can go to the mikveh in the morning, wait till the afternoon. If she sees no blood till nighttime, great, right till the sun sets, she's good, then nothing. If she sees blood that day, she continues another day to be shomeret yom keneged yom. If she sees blood on that 3rd day, she becomes a zava gedola. Now, if we're going to view every day as part of the morning, she's already pure, and only if she sees later in the day, she becomes impure. So Rabbi Yossi, if he holds part of the day, she's impure, she's already impure, as part of the day, she's pure, that makes her pure for the day, and only if she sees blood later, does it only start clicking in then? Well, zava gemura, which a zava gemura is a complete zava, which means a zava gedola of 3 days, demaite korban, in those days had to bring a sacrifice. Nowadays, it's only the 7 clean days that are left. But in those days, when there were sacrifices, they also had to bring a sacrifice. How could you ever have a case of that? Why? It's obvious. Let's say she sees in the middle of the day. The beginning of the day was already, she was pure. Zava gedola means you see 3 days in a row. But if we cut each day into 2, and the first part she's pure, she basically is considered pure. and then she becomes impure later, how can you connect that with the previous day? You've already had a break of theoretically a whole day in between, because we count miksad hayom kekulo. So you could never have a scenario where a woman becomes a zava gedola, and we know the Torah talks about a zava gedola. So Rabbi Yossi we have a serious problem with his approach. To which the Gemara is going to answer two possible answers. That a zava gedola can only be in particular situations. The first obvious answer is, one could suggest, Yomi. Zava gedola is when you bleed continuously for 3 days, right? We're only talking about a situation where there was a stop in the bleeding in the morning. But if you bleed continuously for 3 days, then you'd be a zava gedola. But if there's breaks, and in a way that you could say miksad hayom kekulo, then you wouldn't connect those 3 days, basically. Because each day she bled, the beginning of the day would be considered fine, and then the end of the day would be a problem, but that would be like starting all over again. Second option, ibait ema, if every time the 3 days, so she sees day one, then it's not even 3, it's really twice. Between day 1 and day 2, she starts bleeding, or it doesn't matter when she started, around the time of sunset. And she continues to bleed through sunset until it's already the next day, halachically, right? Because the day starts at night. Then you can't say part of the day is pure because the day started off with impurity. Miksad hayom kekulo only works here to say we're going to consider you pure for the first half and impure for the second half, is if you were actually pure when the day started. But if you started because the blood flowed specifically through sunset till the end of the day, the halachic day, to the beginning of the next day, then we can't say miksad hayom kekulo. So either you have blood for 3 days straight, or even if it's not blood for 3 days straight, but the bleeding continued from the end of the first day through the beginning of the second day, from the end of the second day to the beginning of the third day, then you would be a zava gedola. You don't need it to be the whole time flowing, but if it flowed as the day was starting and continued from the day before, then there would be this continuum, and you wouldn't be able to say, oh, the day started off pure. That must be already where, we're having this break in between day 1 and day 2. And with that, Hadran al Nazir, we finish the second chapter. Okay, I want to just point out one interesting thing about miksad hayom kekulo. In general, when we use miksad hayom kekulo, for example, the most popular one is avilut. We say that miksad hayom kekulo, we go literally with yom as daytime. And the miksad hayom kekulo has to be in the morning. That's why we sit shiva in the morning, right? We always sit shiva the whole night, right? I mean, obviously you don't do it all night long, but we sit shiva at night. The next morning you sit shiva for a short amount of time, a few minutes, and then you're finished. But miksad hayom kekulo only works during the daytime. Here's an example where miksad hayom kekulo is being used differently, being used even at night when the halachic day comes in and not the daytime. So that's just an interesting distinction about a use of miksad hayom kekulo that's different from the way we use it in some other places. Okay, moving on, new chapter. This chapter is going to be good because we've already seen this chapter. Okay, you might recall in Dapim, Hey, and Vav, we had a whole discussion, Bar Pada, Rav Matna, about how many days is Nazir, 29 or 30. And then we kept bringing up, against the opinion of 29, this Mishna. We kept bringing up all the different sections. So we've really dealt with most of them already before. So it's going to be good review, and we'll learn them and see what our Gemara does with them here. Okay, I'm going to share screen because it will help you organize these cases. Okay, so here goes our Mishnah. Just pull this down. Okay. Here's our Mishnah. We're going to have 3 cases. Someone's going to take on nazirut. It's helpful to see in the chart. Either simple Hareini Nazir without any specifications of days. We already know that means it's 30 days. Or you specified 30 days, which theoretically you didn't really need to do, because if you just said Hareini Nazir, you'd already be 30 days. So we'll see how that affects things. And if you specified, and then we have, you took upon yourself 2 time periods of nazirut. And then we're going to have the law, lechatchila, what the ideal is, what day you're supposed to do the shaving and the korbanot, sacrifices. And then b'diavad, what if you did it already on the day before? Would it work or would it not? So let's start with that, and then we'll get to the second part. Misha amar hareini nazir. So you said simply, I'm going to be a nazir. Then, what is he supposed to do? Mikalech yom 31. So theoretically, right, makes a little more sense if you say nazirut is 30 days, and then you do the process of finishing your nazirut on the next day. But if you shave the day before, you fulfilled your obligation. B'diavad. Why? If you hold 30 days, remember, then we say, well, mitzadeyom kekulo. You already fulfilled part of your obligation in the morning, and therefore after that, you're good to go. According to the one who says it's 29 days, well, remember, we learned that we had to explain that. What is he saying? He's saying, oh, there's proof for me. Obviously, you could do it on the 30th day because it really only is 29 days. Well, then why ideally did you do it on 31? And he said, well, the rabbis kind of said, because you didn't say any specified amount of days, maybe you really meant 30, but right, probably you meant 29, but let's just be strict and make it 30 in an ideal world. Hareini Nazir 30 yom. What if you say I'm going to be a Nazir for 30 days? Case number 2. So now, they don't even tell you, but obviously, Megalech Yom 31, because that's the next day. So that's clear. But in Gilech Yom 30 lo yatsa. Here's the difference. If you did it on the 30th day, you didn't fulfill your obligation. Why? Why don't you say Mitzadeyom Kekulo, according to the one who says Mitzadeyom Kekulo, right? If you're Bar Pad, that makes sense. Hareini Nazir was really 29, and that's why 30-day works. Here you said 30, and therefore it doesn't work. According to Rabbanit, you'd have to say the Mitzadeyom Kekulo only works in the case. Okay, so there's 2 options. The Gemara there says it's when you said Shleimi, you said 30 full complete days. Now, there's a machloket Rambam or Tosefta. Rambam says you have to actually say the word shleimim in order for this halacha to kick in, that it won't work if you do it on the 30th day. Tosefta says the fact that you didn't say Hareini Nazir, which you could have said, and you would have been 30 days, and you specifically said 30 days means that you meant shleimim, full, complete, even though you didn't say complete. So there's a debate about whether you actually have to say complete for this halacha to be correct, or do we just assume anyone who says 30 days means 30 complete days? And then you would say, that's why it doesn't work on the 30th day. Mishna. So now you took upon yourself 2 time periods of nizirut. So one's going to kick in. As soon as that one's over, the next one kicks in. So how does it work? Again, in the ideal world, the first one, Yom 31, because that's obvious, 30, and then wait till the 31st day. Which then starts on the first day, on the 31st day, is now going to end on the 60th day, and therefore, the second one you do on day 61. But if you did the first one a day earlier on the 30th day, then the second one you basically do on the 60th day, because then your nizirut already starts your second one on day 30, it ends on day 59, and then you basically have the next day, which is the 60th day. And obviously then b'diavad, im gilach yom shishim chaser echad, if you happen to do that one day before on day 59, which is your last day of nizirut, yatsa, again for the same reasons we said before, because b'diavad, you can be yotze with a 29-day nizirut, or you say you need 30 days, but mitzadeyom kekulo, you already fulfilled it in the morning, therefore you can do your sacrifices. And now we're going to have a testimonial about this. V'zo edut he'i Rabbi Papias. Al Nazir, he testified about, on Mishna Nazal Shtei Nazirot, testified about this halacha, that if you took on 2 time periods of Nazirut, she'im gilachat harishona yom 30, if you shaved for the first one on the 30th day, this is the b'diavad halacha, if you already did it, the post facto, Migalech Tashniya Liyom Shishim, you would do it on the 60th. This is just a repeat of our Mishnah. V'imgilach Liyom Shishim Chaser Echad, and if you did it on the 50th day, Yatsa. Why? Here he says it a little. He adds this one little bit extra. Sheyom Shal Shloshim Olela Min Minyan, because the 30th day that you shaved on counts as both the last day of your previous and the next day of your second set. That was pretty clear cut. Now we're going to get into stuff that's a little bit more complicated. The Mishnah is going to talk about the same cases, Hareini Nazir 30 Yom, and going to add a case of Hareini Nazir 100 Yom, you're Nazir for 100 days. And it's going to say what happens if you became impure either on the last day or on the day after the last day before you did your sacrifices. Now, generally, a Nazir who becomes impure to a dead body has to undo all the days they did and start from the beginning. So the question is, what if this happens on your last day? What if it happens on after you finish counting your days, but you haven't yet brought your sacrifices, so you're still a Nazir? So we're going to see different opinions, and also this we saw before. So let's start inside. Misha Amal Hareini Nazir. Okay, again, the simple case. You just said, I'm a Nazir. Nitma Yom Shloshim. If he gets impure on the last day, soter et hakol. He has to go back to the very beginning. What's the difference if it's his 30th day or not his 30th day? He hasn't finished his days. He has to go back to the beginning. Rabbi Eliezer omer, eno soter ela shiva. Rabbi Eliezer says, what are you talking about? He doesn't really cancel out any days. He just has to wait the 7 days till he finishes his nizirut, his becoming pure from the dead body, because it takes 7 days to go. You do the sprinkling of the para aduma, the red heifer waters, etc. You have this process of 7 days of purification. Once you're done, go bring your sacrifice. You're finished with your nizirut. Okay, what we're going to have in the Gemara, and this is the last part of the chart, is the Gemara is going to go through all the reasons for Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, why did Rabbi Eliezer say what he did in all of these cases? Next case, Hareini Nazir 30 yom. I'm going to be a Nazir for 30 days. Nitma yom 30 soter et hakol, period. Meaning, everybody agrees in this case that it cancels the entire thing. Why? Because in this case, you said 30. What did we say already? 30 means shleimim, or like the Rambam said, maybe only, this is only true if you said shleimim, because you need complete days, whether you specified it or we just assume that's the case, because you need complete days, even Rabbi Eliezer is going to agree that you have to go back to the beginning, because this day is no different from any other day. Next case. Hareini Nazir 100 yom. I'm going to be a Nazir for 100 days. So nitma yom 100, so this is like the 30, where you're basically taking upon yourself complete Nazirut. So you would have expected that they would all agree it cancels the whole thing. But here you see already from the chart, there's a debate. So if nitma yom 100, if you got impure on the last 100th day, soter et hakol, the entire thing is, you have to go back to the beginning, right? Very frustrating, but you have to go back to the beginning. Rabbi Eliezer omer, eno soter ela 30. You only have to go back and do 30 days. You don't have to go back to the very beginning. Why is this? We already saw this, but we'll get to it in the Gemara. Nitma yom 101. Okay, we saw it on Daf Vav Amud Bet. Nitma yom 101. If you became impure on day 101, soter 30 yom. In this case, what's the difference? The difference in the rabbis here is that once you passed your 100 days, you completed your 100 days, and now you're just waiting around for your sacrifice. So now you don't have to go back and do a complete 100 days, but you do have to do a complete term of nizirut because you didn't finish, right? Finishing is only when you actually finish. And it's similar to what we saw before, that you're still a Nazir, you still can't do any of those things, you still get lashes. Remember, that was Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yochanan 2 days ago. Do you get lashes for everything or just for impurity to dead? But here they basically say, right, even, first of all, both of them agree impurity to dead, it's really the same. And therefore, you're going to have to do at least what's considered a unit of nizirut from the beginning, which is only 30 days, though not 100. But Rabbi Eliezer omer, eno soter ela shiva. Rabbi Eliezer is consistent with what he said earlier about Hareini Nazir on the Yom 30, which was, again, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he was already done, right? Mitzad Yom Kekulo, part of the day was the whole day, and therefore it was kind of like being on the 101st day, where you're basically done. You just haven't brought your sacrifices, so you wait the 7 days till you're pure, and then you take care of your sacrifice. So I'll leave the chart up for one more minute as we go through all the explanations of Rabbi Eliezer for all the cases. It'll help you, because now we're going to go case by case. So back to case 1. You said Hareini Nazir, I'm a regular Nazir. I'm going to read it inside now because the Gemara quotes the entire line. Misha Amar Hareini Nazir v'nitma yom 30. You said I'm going to be a Nazir, and you became impure on the 30th day. Soter et hakol. So you have to go back to the beginning. Rabbi Eliezer only requires you to wait 7 days. Why? Rabbi Eliezer, kol achar melot shiv'a soter. If you're already after the completion of your days, now you have to add here that he obviously holds mitzad yom kekulo. You're on day 30. You've already finished your day, basically, because part of the day is like a whole day. So you've finished your count of 30 days. So once you're after milot, this is a quote from the pasuk, achar milot yemei naziruto. After you've completed it, well, then if you become impure, you just have to be, and obviously you can't bring your sacrifices today because you're impure. You can't go to the temple and bring sacrifices when you're impure. So wait till you get out of your impurity and go for it. So, and then when you're done with your impurity, you're finished. You don't have to go back. Next case. Hareini Nazir 30 yom v'nitma yom 30 soter et hakol. This was the case they don't disagree about. Why is that? Lo palig Rabbi Eliezer da'amar shleimim. Again, it's a case where you said shleimim. Again, two interpretations. Either you actually added the word Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom Shlemi or Shloshim Yamim Shlemim, you would say 30 complete days. That's the Rambam. Or Tosefta, who says no, because you specifically added 30 days, it must mean you meant I want to be 30 complete days rather than Stam Nazir, who's 30 not complete days, where you don't need the full 30th day. Third case. Hareini Nazir mea yom v'nitma yom mea soter et hakol. Rabbi Eliezer omer eino soter ela shloshim. Here, Rabbi Eliezer says you only, if you did 100 days and you became impure on the very last day, you have to go back 30. Now, why does he say you have to go back 30, right? Theoretically, either 100 or only 7. So they're now going to say, Bekula kadavina ba'aliba de barpada v'Rabban. Now, they don't actually tell you the answer. They say, oh, we already discussed this in the debate between Rabban and Barpada on Daf Vav Hayim Vav. So if we look back on Vav and Mebet, if you remember, they asked, we really don't understand this option of Rabbi Eliezer. It was brought as a question. This is actually one of those complicated ones. It wasn't clear. Was it a question just on Rabbi Eliezer? Was it a question on Barpada or Rav Matna or both? Anyway, they explained his opinion in the following way. Reish Lakish said, and I brought it on the chart so you can look at it here. Hainu Tama de Rabbi Eliezer, the reason why he says Eino Soter Ela Shloshim is a special drasha in the pasuk. Theoretically, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it should be Eino Soter Ela Shiva because you've already completed, because Miktzad Hayom Kikulo. But says Zot Torah Nazir b'yom melot yimei nizro. This is the rule for the Nazir on the day he completed the days of his nizirut. HaTorah Amra, the Torah said, Nitma b'yom melot, tein lo Torah Nazir. It's a special drasha that they said, because it says b'yom melot, the day you complete, and it also says before that Torah Nazir. Torah Nazir means the rules of the Nazir. The way they understand Torah Nazir is the basic rules of Nazir, which is the minimum amount, is 30 days. So what they say is if you mess up on the Yom Melot, on the last day, then you basically don't have to do the 100 days. You only have to do the 30 days. Now, I made a mistake before, sorry. It's not like Hareini Nazir, Eino Soter Ela Shiva. It wouldn't be that. I'm sorry, I got confused for a minute. Let's just review. It's different from Hareini Nazir because here you said Mea Yom. Mea Yom means 100 complete days. It should be more similar to Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom, and theoretically, you should go back to the beginning. But there's a special dispensation on the last day that you only, if it's the last day, this is kind of to help you out so you don't feel, oh my God, I made it to the very end and now I can't do it at all, right? I have to go back to the very beginning. They only make you go back and do 30 days. Now, why is this different from the previous case? Because the previous case, you were only a Nazir for 30 days. So since you were a Nazir for 30 days, it's Soter et Hakol, because you have to go back to the beginning. You need 30 days to complete it. In this case, it was 100. And again, 100 means 100 complete. That's why it's not a case of doesn't cancel it at all, like the first case, Hareini Nazir. But it would have to be, instead of 100, you wouldn't think you need the whole 100, special drasha on the pasuk, if it's Yom Melot, if it's the last day before you've completed it, because you said you need complete days, then you would basically go back and have to redo only 30 of them. Special dispensation. Okay, that's it. Okay, they don't give you the last case because the last case is obvious. If you said 100 and then you became impure on 101, then what does Rabbi Eliezer say? Eino Soter Ela Shiva, because it's exactly like the first case. You're already on the day past Yom Melot, then already you finished your count. He doesn't think you have to recount anything. You basically go back to, as soon as you're pure, you're already good to go. You can bring your sacrifices without a problem because you finished your count. So that was a list of all the cases and explanation of Rabbi Eliezer. The assumption was Chachamim was pretty clear. They don't hold Miktzad Hayom Kikulo. They think that when it's complete, it's right. Either which way it's complete, and therefore you have to go back all the way to the beginning. That's more simple of an explanation, simple way to understand. So therefore the Gemara didn't bother to explain. New Mishna. Okay, maybe now is a good point before we move on to just review what we've done today. We'll do a summary here, and then when we get to the end of the daf, we'll just do a summary from here going forward. So summary of what we've done so far. We started with Rabbi Yossi, who said we were trying to connect Rav that says Shivim Ole Lekanu Lekam Miktzad Hayom Kikulo. You can view part of the day as a whole. Count day 70 in the morning as day 70. Count it once the son is born as day 71 as well, and the first day of counting for your son. And because of that, you get to count it also as the next day of the 100, basically saving yourself a day, and you could do everything on the 99th day. Then this is all, or basically you finish on the 99th day and do it all on the 100th day. Then we tried to say he holds like Rabbi Yossi, but that would only be if this case of the Korban Pesach that Rabbi Yossi was talking about. The reason why we're lenient in Korban Pesach and strict about the tumah is only rabbinic, and then really, you're really not impure in the morning of that day, right, until you actually see the blood in the Shomer Yom Keneged Yom. We prove that Rabbi Yoshaya also thinks that he holds to Rabbanit because of this conversation he had with Rabbi Yochanan. And kind of his comment about Rabbi Yochanan, when he said, you hold like Rabbi Yossi, it was clear he understood Rabbi Yochanan as viewing Rabbi Yossi that the tumah is only rabbinic and not by Torah law. Then we asked a question on Rabbi Yossi, how could you ever have a zava gedola if the morning she's considered pure and only in the afternoon she's impure? And we gave two explanations, either she's continually bleeding or she bleeds as one day ends and the next day starts. Then we started the next chapter, which had this list of 3 cases, Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom, and Hareini Nazir, Shtei Naziruyot. You took upon yourself 2 time periods of Nazirut, and we discussed when they end in an ideal way, when you're supposed to do your sacrifices, and b'diavad, if you've already done it the day before, does it work or does it not work? It all depends on the circumstance. Then we discussed what happens when you become impure on the last day or the day after the last day before you brought your sacrifices. Again, discussing Hareini Nazir, regular Stam Nazirut, if you said Shloshim Yom, or if you said Mea Yom, and what the differences are between the cases, and what the machloka between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis is. And then the Gemara basically spent its time going through the cases of Rabbi Eliezer, cases 1, 2, and 3. 4 was obvious that could be learned from 1, so they didn't even mention it, but basically going through the cases and why does Rabbi Eliezer hold what he does. Now we're up to a new Mishna. This is a bit of a different thing, although it is talking about someone becoming impure. Normally, like I said, you become impure when you're a Nazir, and then what happens? You stop your count, you go back to you finish your 7 days of becoming pure from the dead body, just process in and of itself. Then you go back and start counting your Nazir from the beginning. Yamim Arishonim Yiplu. They basically disappear, they get wiped out. You have to start from the beginning. That was the whole thing about our Mishnah, that maybe though on the last day, or at least the day after the last day, maybe you wouldn't have to go start from the beginning, or do you? But let's say, they're going to say there's an exception to this rule. Normally, when you become impure, besides waiting the 7 days, you have to also shave and bring sacrifices, right? There's special sacrifices you bring before you start your Nazirut again. Specific sacrifices for someone who becomes impure to the dead. So, Mishna Zal, v'hu b'beit hakvarot. Let's say you took upon Nazirut while you were in a cemetery. Okay? Now, what's the issue? The issue is your Nazirut never took effect yet, because while you're in the cemetery, you're impure. You can't start Nazirut. Now, what happens? It seems the prohibitions kick in, but you're not really a Nazir. You certainly don't start counting days. You're impure. You can't count them as days. So the question is, do you have to bring sacrifices for becoming impure as a Nazir? Because you never were really a Nazir yet. You took upon your Nazirut while you were impure to the dead. So afil hayasham shloshim yom, even if you stayed in the cemetery, let's say you camped out there, why you would, I don't know, but what they're basically saying is, you said I'm a Nazir, which basically means 30 days. If those whole 30 days you end up sleeping in the cemetery and never getting out of your impurity, it doesn't matter whether it's 30, whether it's 1, it doesn't make a difference. The point is here, these days don't count at all for your Nazirut, not for your days of Tumah, and you don't have to bring a sacrifice for impurity. Because in order to bring a sacrifice for impurity, you had to be a Nazir first, and you weren't a Nazir here. But, let's say you left the cemetery after you made this declaration. You left the cemetery, you became pure, okay? You got out of your impurity. And then you went back into the cemetery, even, we're going to see in a minute, even if it's the same day, meaning you took upon Nazirut, let's say for an hour, and then you went into the cemetery, then already olim lo min minyan. Then those days are going to count as impurity days, and you're going to have to bring a korban tumah, v'mevi korban tumah, okay? And then you bring your sacrifices. But Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with this last halacha, as he did in the previous mission. Rabbi Eliezer omer, lo bo bayom, not if it's on the same day. Shneimah, because it says in the pasuk, hayamim harishonim yiplu. It says your first days will be dropped. What did you notice in that pasuk? It doesn't say your first day, or right? It says days plural. So Rabbi Eliezer says, in order for all the laws of a Nazir who becomes impure kick in, which means basically that you're going to have to bring sacrifices, special sacrifices. It's only if ad shiur yamim rishonim, you need plural days. You need 2 days. Debate about whether you need miktzat yom kikulo on that second day, and maybe part of the day is enough, or do you need 2 complete days? And only if it happens on day 3 will you have to bring sacrifice. That's already something that's not clear in the Mishnah, that there's a debate among the Rishonim about this. But the point being is 1 day or 1 hour or something like that is definitely not enough. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you need 2 days at least in order to be chayav the korbanot. Okay, so if you were in the cemetery, when you took it upon yourself, you left, and then you came back after you were pure for a moment there, for a day, whatever it might be, and then you go back into the cemetery. The rabbis say, then already your korban tumah kicks in, and Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it doesn't. You need at least 2 days. Now we get into a different machloket in the Gemara between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Itmar, it was said, Mishna nazal v'hu b'beit hakvarot. This is exactly the case in our Mishnah. You took upon nazirut while you're in the cemetery. Rabbi Yochanan amal nazirut chala alav. Rabbi Yochanan says, which we would have assumed, right? Your nazirut takes effect. Now, when does it take effect? Not yet, really, because you're impure. Once you're in the cemetery, you say, I'm going to be a Nazir. Now, normally, you have to understand, normally nazirut kicks in immediately. That was the whole thing about when I have a child and I'm a Nazir. Since the child hadn't happened yet, your second one kicks in immediately, because as soon as you say this declaration, you're a Nazir. In this case, you're impure. You can't possibly be a Nazir. As soon as you get out of being impure, you've gone through your process. You don't need sacrifices in this case because you're not a Nazir that became impure, as we said in the Mishnah. Basically, the next, you're finished with your impurity, you're good to go. You're basically a Nazir. That's kind of the way we understood the Mishnah, right? Well, Reish Lakish amal, ein nazirut chala alav. Forget that you don't have to bring a korban tumah in this case. Forget that. You're not even a Nazir at all, because there's no such thing as taking upon to be a Nazir when you're in a state of impurity. He says, what do you have to do if you really want to be a Nazir? You leave the cemetery, you finish your 7 days of impurity. You have to say again, I'm going to be a Nazir. Do another declaration. Otherwise, you're not a Nazir at all. So now we're going to read inside what their logic is. Rabbi Yochanan amar nazirut chala alav. Why? Sabra mitzla talia b'kaima. He says it's kind of hanging there. You said it. It's a statement that can't apply yet, so it's hanging in the air kind of thing. As soon as it finds, right, it's like water, right? You have water that's good for, definitely here, it's been pouring rain for days, right? If you have water problems in your house, they always say the water finds its way, right? It'll find a place to go if you don't have it draining out anywhere, and it'll creep into your house. So likewise here, you have the nazirut that you said, and basically you're saying it can't go anywhere yet, but as soon as it finds a place to go, it'll go there, okay? So as soon as you're pure, there it goes, and you'll be a Nazir. But Reish Lakish amar, ein nazirut chala alav. He says, no, there's no meaning to your statement by taking upon nazirut when you're in a cemetery or when you're impure in general. He doesn't really explain his position, why it is, but he explains how it works. He says, listen, if you take upon nazirut again, it'll work. But if not, your statement was meaningless. So now we're going to have a slew of questions that Rabbi Yochanan is going to attack Reish Lakish with, starting with our Mishnah, because it really doesn't sound like what our Mishnah was saying. Eitive Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Mishna nazar v'hu b'beit hakvarot afilu haya sham 30 yom eino lilum min minyan ve'eino mevi korban tumah. Remember, he said you take upon nazirut in a cemetery. Even if you were there for 30 days, they don't count as part of your count, and you don't bring a korban tumah. By the way, don't count as part of your count. Of course, they don't count as part of your count. No days of tumah ever count as part of your count. It's kind of a bit of meaningless to say, but I say it anyway. And but the chidush here in the Mishnah is you don't have to bring a sacrifice. Now, what's what you can infer from here? Korban tumah hu delo ma'ite. The main thing it's telling you in the Mishnah is you don't have to bring a korban tumah. But it was pretty clear, and if it would have meant there's no nazirut at all, they would have said so. It's pretty clear that you don't bring a korban tumah because you haven't started your nazirut yet, but as soon as you get out and finish your impurity, your nazirut will start. And that goes clearly against what Reish Lakish said. So Amar Le, what does he say? No, eino b'torat tumah ve'eino b'torat korban. He says they didn't spell the whole thing out, but what they meant to say is you don't have to bring korbanot tum'ah, right? You're not a nazir shenitma because you never took upon nazirut. And not only that, but you're not b'torah korban of a regular nazir, meaning you wouldn't even have to bring after the 7 days pass and then 30 days pass, you wouldn't even have to bring a korban nazirut because you're not really a nazir, okay? So what they're saying is you're not, the way he reads the Mishna is you're not a nazir that became impure and not even a nazir at all, okay? He adds that to the Mishna. It obviously doesn't say so, but he's saying you're not even a nazir. Eitive, another question from the Tosefta. It says in the Tosefta, Mishaya tamei v'nazal, same kind of case. You were impure and you took upon yourself nazirut at the time. You were impure. Asur legalech v'lishtot yain u'tamei l'meitim. You're already immediately forbidden. And this is what I said before. You might not really be a nazir in terms of counting your days, but, and this sounds like Rabbi Yochanan, but you are, all the prohibitions are upon you immediately, even though you're impure. You can't shave, you can't drink wine, and you can't become impure to the dead. And not only that, but if you do them, you get lashes. This is like we talked about last time, which is if you do those things after you finish your counting and you just haven't gone and done your process yet, you get lashes. Likewise here, you haven't started your count yet, but you're basically a nazir. You're going to be a nazir as soon as you get out of your impurity. So you're in this stage of nazirut and you get lashes. So to which the Gemara obviously says, if you're going to say the nazirut is basically there and it just needs a place to go, which can only go once you become pure, that makes perfect sense why you're going to get lashes. But if you're going to say lo chayla, if you're going to say it doesn't apply like Reish Lakish, why on earth would you be getting lashes? Now we're moving into tomorrow's daf. I'm just going to read the last line and finish, to which Reish Lakish answers. What's the Tosefta talking about? And this doesn't even actually say everything. What he means is yotze, it's where you left the cemetery, you finished your days of impurity, you reaccepted nazirut upon yourself. That's the real word that's missing here. He means you went out, you took upon yourself by a declaration of nazirut again, when you were actually pure, and then you went back into the cemetery. Then you're going to be asur legalech and asur, and all those prohibitions are going to be upon you when you actually took upon nazirut further down the road. It's definitely not the simple reading of the Tosefta, but it is a way that Reish Lakish can have the Tosefta work in with his opinion. We're not done with the questions of Reish Lakish. We're going to continue them because, again, Reish Lakish's opinion really does seem a little bit tricky. Why? Just because, I mean, maybe theoretically it makes sense. Since I can't be a nazir right now, so I can't take upon myself nazirut. That's kind of what he's saying. But certainly the sources don't seem to be indicating that way. And we'll see some more tomorrow. And we'll have a few more questions against him and how he responds. So to review this section of the daf, we started with a Mishna that talked about someone who took upon nazirut while they were in the cemetery. And our main question was, in the Mishna was, are those days, right, there really wasn't such a question, those days since you never started your nazirut, basically those days are not days of a nazir that became impure because you weren't yet a nazir. However, if you left the cemetery and came back in, and there was some moment where your nazirut, where there was tara and your nazirut happened, then when you come back in, you will have to do nazirut of tum'ah, right? You would have to bring your sacrifices. Comes Rabbi Eliezer and he says there have to be a minimum of 2 days. That was the first machloka. Then we had this machloka, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, which really seemed to go against our Mishna, where Reish Lakish says, if you do take upon nazirut when you're impure, it's a meaningless action. And basically you'd have to retake it on when you became pure. And then you'd have to read the Mishna, the case where he went out and came back in, he must have gone out and taken upon nazirut and then went back in. Okay, it's the only way you could really understand. Okay, so we're going to end here. We already brought 2 questions of Rabbi Yochanan against Reish Lakish from Talmudic sources. Reish Lakish tried to answer them, right? Whether we're convinced by them or not, that's a separate thing. But he does have some sort of answer. And we're going to continue along the line of questioning of Rabbi Yochanan attacking Reish Lakish by bringing him Talmudic sources. And what we saw, the use of the word eitive is a good word to learn, which is this word means, just like meitive, it's the same kind of use of a word, where we're going to quote a Talmudic source to knock out something or try to knock out something, question something an Amora said. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan, and often eitive, the difference between meitive and eitive often is meitive usually just comes by itself. Eitive Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. He himself, sometimes it's just the Gemara talking. How could the Gemara say this? There's a Braita, the Stam Gemara, where it's no one in particular. Here it's the two sides of the argument. One is throwing a source at the other, and then the other is responding to it. So we have both coming up in the Gemara. It really depends on how the conversation went along. Was the conversation between the two rabbis arguing, or was it just some later that the Gemara itself was saying, wait, how can he say this? And then they answer for him, even though he's not here to answer for himself. In this case, we actually get the two people who were having the argument, one throwing sources at the other, saying what you said really makes no sense. And then he responds on his own, explaining why he thinks it could work within his opinion. That's it for today. Have a great day, everybody.